Good morning, everybody. If you can, please take your seats. Thank you for all being here. My name is Thomas Hare. I'm the Chief Content Officer of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association servicing the performance-driven and direct-to-consumer marketing world. We appreciate you joining us here at PDMI East at the Eden Rock. The entire PDMI team welcomes you, and we thank all of you for joining us. We had a tremendous response in about middle of January. I didn't think I'd be standing here in front of a crowd of people, but in February, we had the single biggest month of registration in the history of the PDMI for any event that we've ever done. And that's thanks to you and your belief in us and what we're doing here and wanting to get together as we hopefully move past the era of COVID. So thank you. We're here today also thanks to our 40 sponsoring companies, including Paymerang, who is our educational sponsor. There's a quick message from Paymerang.
People ask me frequently, what is Paymerang and why do you use it? I tell them that Paymerang is a great way to pay your vendors, and you also get money back. And usually they're like, that's too good to be true. You've got to be kidding me. And you don't have to do all the upfront legwork. So I talk to them about it and I tell them how it works. You sign up with them, they do all the research on your vendors. You send them your vendor list, they do the research, they give you an average of what potentially your rebates may be based on that information. Then with that information, you go through it. And after you've implemented, you can see it takes away so much time from your accounts payable team. You see that you no longer have to do massive bank reconciliations. You see the amount of time that it saves your team. I don't know why anybody wouldn't use Paymerang. So when I'm talking to other CFOs or I'm talking to other controllers, I tell them why I use Paymerang and I explain the process of using it. And then most of the people want to find out about it.
So thank you again, Paymerang, for your support. We're here today for our second session, which is Hispanic Media Attribution, a two-pronged attack. I'd like to welcome the members of the PDMI U.S. Hispanic Council who created this session, Marcelino Miyares, who's our chair of the council, as well as Denira Borrero, who's sitting on the panel with us, Shira Witelson, a member of our Brand Response Council, actually joining us today, and a couple of our Hispanic Council members are out there in the audience as well. So thank you all for putting this together, and I'll let you take it from here, Marce.
Which is the...
That's your forward.
My picture's about 10 years old, so...
You should be like, that was last week.
Yeah, so, that was pre-COVID. So we're here to talk today about a subject that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on, but nobody has any firm answers, which is this idea of attribution. And we called it a two-pronged attack because us in the Hispanic industry have a dual challenge. We not only have to figure out how much traffic we're driving from our DRTV campaigns to the web, but we also have to sort of suss ourselves out from all of the English language media that's driving to the same channels, right? So two-pronged attack. So we start with a kind of a thought experiment. And we're here to say that we think we have the beginnings of an answer, by the way, on this subject. So we start with a thought experiment. If a client's buying Spanish language media and they're buying English language media, and let's just presume for a moment they're buying at relatively equal paces, although most of the time the English billing is a lot higher. But let's assume for a moment they're buying more or less at the same click. We know that the Spanish language media is going to be driving some traffic to the Spanish language media. And those of us in the industry know that a lot of traffic goes to the English language media, particularly organic and direct search. And then we presume that the general market media is driving mostly, if not 99%, to the general market domain. So Shira, whose company is Result, she specializes in attribution analytics. We came together as an agency and as a vendor to begin to study this dynamic, to get a feel for where the traffic that we're driving from Spanish language media is ending up. And we also wanted to understand the relationship between calls and visits. So there's several different layers that we wanted to understand. And she has a different approach, which you can talk to her after the meeting. But we went for it for some clients. And what we found were three key learnings. The first and the most surprising is that for every visit that we're generating to the Spanish language site, we're generating 3 to the general market site. We knew that there was a lot of traffic, but we didn't have a sense that the proportion was that weighted in favor of the English. And this is for one particular campaign. I can't say who the client is, but this gives you a sense of the disproportion. There's a dotted line between the general market media and the general market domain, because in this particular study, we didn't have access. The client buys mostly PI, so we didn't have access to airtimes and channels. So what Shira did was she baselined 3 years of data on the English side with the assumption, and the client told us, with the assumption that the media spends are generally the same, right? So it's a safe assumption, but we didn't calculate the traffic from general market media to general market domain, just full disclosure. We also learned that the Spanish language, let me go back, I forgot an important point. This is all on top of the calls, right? So this is traffic that comes during the same campaign as we're generating calls. And it's a coincidence in the ratio, but generally for every call that we generated, there were 3 to 4 calls, 3 to 4 visits to the site. So at the end of the day, we were generating 4 times the contacts online than we were on the phone, which was also surprising to us as a DRTV buyer that specializes in generating phone calls, right? So we learned that there's a huge relationship, obviously, between the Spanish language television buys and both English and Spanish language attributed visitors. Her program is called signal analysis. Her methodology is called signal analysis, so it results in these kinds of dashboards. And what you see here is you see some peaks and valleys. And what we learned is when there was no Hispanic media, there was also no visits, right? So this is testimony to her baselining on the one hand, but it makes sense. We obviously get a lot less traffic when we're not buying media, even though we were still getting calls, but we get a lot less web traffic. But if you also notice those peaks and valleys on the very bottom site, the overall cost per contact is significantly lower depending on where we are in the cycle and how much we were spending. So even when we weren't spending in Spanish, we were still generating visits, right? So there was some level of drag, some level of familiarity, a lot of probably direct search and organic search. But there's a clear pattern on the traffic that we're driving between the Spanish language media and the English and Spanish language visits. The other key learning is that over time, and COVID probably had something to do with this, given the date range that we were studying, over time, the cost pers came way down, the cost per visits. Right, came way down from $17 to $11 in just a 12-month period. So at least the Latino audience that we're reaching is obviously visiting at a much higher pace than they were even a year ago. And our theory is that it's COVID. I don't know if you guys would agree. Our theory is that it's COVID, but there's also a lot more ways now for the market to connect to the internet. So the use of QR codes and other measures are making a huge difference. So we have these 3 key learnings. For every call that we generate, there's 3 to 4 visits. Those visits distribute 1 Spanish, 3 to English. Spanish is directly tied, particularly to the English visits, and Spanish is directly tied to a lower cost per click over time. That begins to raise questions, right? So that's kind of the point of this panel now, is we have 4 or 5 questions, and if you have questions, we're here to address them. But it raises the ultimate thought question is where do we go from here? How do we take advantage of this new information that we have on the ecosystem that now has some numbers that leading to basically the last, or I don't know where it is on this list, how do we monetize this? We have a couple of clients who tell us that they're already giving us credit in our allowables for whatever traffic there is online, right? But when you look at the previous slide, when you look at how the costs are decreasing for reaching these people, but the goals stay the same, it makes you wonder, are we leaving money on the table? Are our clients leaving money on the table? Not through allowables, but through not doing more in the digital space in Spanish in general, or figuring out how to generate more digital traffic from our DRTV campaigns. So with that, we'll start with the first question for the panel. And again, if anybody has any questions related, any pullouts from any of this, please jump in. We don't have all the answers, but we can start. So the first question is, how can we have some baseline information here that's going to prove true for some of our other clients as well. So we sort of see this as the beginning of establishing some norms, at least for the campaigns at our shop. And Denira's been doing digital for a lot longer than I, so she may have similar or different norms. But how do we establish some standards for the impact that DRTV has on digital so that we can begin to blend data? And as a DRTV industry, the Spanish language DRTV industry is really under attack. Our inventory is shrinking. We're fighting against all these D2C brands who are paying a lot more. So we need to figure out ways to make our buys more efficient. So I'm going to start with Denira, who's been dealing with this issue for a long time.
Well, in terms of standards, I think the first standard, is an understanding and a common belief that, just as you had proven, that Hispanic affects the English side of the traffic. So I think whenever we work with a new client especially, we have to establish that our TV will drive traffic to your English online presence, wherever that is, Facebook, social media, your website, and it will drive, or even your e-commerce sites on Amazon and so forth. So a lot of that is a baseline discussion on why we know that. And this sort of data is priceless. I hope you publish it, really. And so that's the first baseline. We do have clients, and interestingly, and it was even before the pandemic, that have been willing to share data with us on the English side. And that's the other baseline standard. In order for us to prove out your Hispanic impact, we need to have some understanding what you're doing on the English side. We don't need to understand all your buys at the station level. All we need to understand is what you spend, maybe at the station level, but we don't need to get any details on your rates and so forth. But we need to understand that so we could do analysis like this. So one is that there's an impact. Two is that we need to share data amongst agencies and with your sales group to prove it out. And I think, honestly, three is that it's an understanding that it's a quick changing environment. So what we do today may change what we do tomorrow, but it's really a collaborative effort if we want to show and prove out the Hispanic. But what we do know is that it does have an impact. And I have worked with several clients that by coincidence, maybe the English went down or went dark for whatever reason, inventory reasons, or for whatever reasons the English media for a particular campaign went down. And in those cases, we jump on it and we say, okay, that went dark, we're running, what does your English site look like? And very coincidentally, it was very much like that, a 3 to 4 to 1. So for every visit we were getting on the Spanish site, we were generating 3 to 4 visits on the English site, and followed through sales. Did not measure the calls to visits in those cases. But in the cases, and it's rare, but if you're talking constantly with your clients, you know when the English goes down, you could move and see that's a clear read. And so those are kind of standards, and mostly it's collaborative.
Now,
So-
we didn't measure traffic to any social media. This was all to URLs, right?
Yes,
Okay.
this was to the website. And first, it's great to hear that we have some kind of similar results. The thing I believe that crucial for brands, a standard crucial for brands that advertise in Spanish language, they need to understand that today, right, especially in America, people talk many languages at home. Me specifically, I speak with my husband French, but I don't want the kids to understand. They start to understand. Or we speak Hebrew, we speak a bit of English. It's all over the place. But when we do a search on the internet, we'll do a search in English. So assuming there's like a one-to-one relationship between the language seen on TV to the language that will be searched, it's a wrong approach because it's going to bring inaccurate results. So this is critical to go away from only one-to-one approach to a multiple combination approach. This is the only way to get the full picture in order to measure the...
That's true. I don't think, and there's also that understanding that I don't think people automatically get, is that how you absorb media and entertainment. Like, for example, TV is very different of how you interact online. And I think, especially in the U.S., I think once you're online, I think it's a very common standard thing to just operate and transact in English.
Correct. And sometimes, you hear a word in the ad that's very a similar word in English, right? Even though the ad was in Spanish. But when you do the search, the first link that's come up is the English website. So it's very important to take all of this.
Yeah, the algorithms favor the English sites as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other nuance of this study is that it also didn't the traffic to the English didn't include traffic that was coming from the Spanish URL, which we know intuitively and anecdotally would be a common experience. You might go to the Spanish language website, particularly if it's a vanity URL, but eventually you get frustrated and you go to the English, particularly if you want to buy. So this was just a purely TV-driven traffic.
And it is important, I think, to look at e-commerce sites because they're becoming more and more, from what I hear my clients, especially the retailers versus the lead gen service-oriented, the Amazon piece is becoming larger. It has been becoming, but even more so, even the vast majority of their sales. So that's going to layer in another complexity with our attributions.
Yes, for sure. This is part that...
Yeah, and we don't have any way, for example, of measuring the traffic to Amazon, which we know in our market is huge. It would change this ratio completely, probably, the direct search for product at Amazon.
I believe it's all about data access, right? If data access is there, it can be measured. It's all depend of the relationship between brands, agency, vendors about data access. Something also need to be taken into account. So
it is possible to cross that bridge?
It is possible as long as data access is there.
Yeah, you need the data.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So the next question is, how do we monetize this traffic, right? So we know Spanish is easy to figure out, and you can A/B your landers and your carts, and you can optimize in Spanish, but we have all this Spanish language dominant, Spanish language preferring audience going to English language sites. How do we improve performance? How do we improve conversions?
Yeah, because in and of itself, if you're just looking at Spanish, it is hard to prove out the ROI, especially these days, because it is going over to the digital side. So that baseline conversation and the access to data is so important. Otherwise, even the initial investment in a Hispanic test, you will have a distorted view of your results. And if you're going to invest in Spanish, you need to invest in that data trafficking. You have to. Otherwise, you will be leaving money on the table, or you may as well not even start testing.
Yeah. So. And we haven't, this particular client is a lead gen client. And also I want to mention, you saw those spikes to English language sites. That was on spends on average between $10,000 and $20,000 a week. So not even a big spend. And we saw traffic over the course of a year close to 200,000 visits to the English, right? So that's a question for you, Shira, is how can we differentiate, how can we attribute on the English language sites what's coming, what ROIs are being generated in Spanish?
Okay, so I see it as a three-step approach. The first step is data collection from the website. So there's two there's many ways that everybody's doing it right now. Is in fact vendors are telling brands put a pixel on the website and data will start to flow in. The problem with that is that from the moment a brand agrees to put a pixel on the website, they open the gate. They give access to that vendor for all the customer data, name, addresses, etc., whatever is passing through the website. Our RSLT approach is a bit different. We believe in data collection that relates to first-party data. So really leverage the data of the brand. So this is the first step. The second step, in order to measure the impact of Spanish, English media, you need to have both airings from the English language media airings and Spanish media airings. The reason is exactly what we just talked, is about the baselining. You need to have this baseline, you need to clean the English media impact from the visits. After that, you can start to attribute. And the attribution, the third step is the attribution approach. We leverage data science only in machine learning. We leverage an approach that Mars mentioned. It's called signal analysis. It's coming from, in fact, similar to earthquake, understanding when an earthquake will occur, because it's kind of a rare event. So in another word, we look at a wave of data, and we are dissecting that big wave into subwave, and each subwave is attributed to the corresponding spot. So it's a three-step approach. This is the approach that we took in this analysis. And after that, after you are able to attribute the visits, for example, you can connect the revenue coming from those visits and then measure ROI. Yes. A bit long, sorry about that.
So there's a question that's not on here, but now that you mentioned e-commerce, you've done a lot of retail attribution for DRTV products. What do you think is the relationship between brick and mortar retail and e-commerce?
Well, you know, it all changed with the pandemic. So we have a few clients that have an incredible amount of presence, traditional as seen on TV, in the brick and mortars. And before the pandemic, and there was a few months where there was absolutely zero retail traffic.
Right.
But it's very much, it's similar to the online traffic attribution in that you need the data, and you need the data coming from your clients. And the more they can share, the better. What we look at is brick and mortar sales at the zip code level. And we look at the zip codes that are highly Hispanic concentrated populations. We look at different percentages, 80% Hispanic density, 50%, 40, 30, and see how that changes. But we basically index it. We look at the highly populated zip codes, retailers in those zip codes. Walmart provides data at the zip code level, so does Target. And a few others, depending on what your client's willing to provide. You could probably get about 50% of their retail sales at the zip code level. And then what we do is we index the sale. We look at the sales in the highly Hispanic concentrated areas, and then we index it against the non-Hispanic concentrated areas. There's a lot more zip codes where there are almost zero Hispanics. And then we look at the general sales, and then we index the Hispanic against the general. Now, obviously, there are Hispanics all over the country, and not just in highly Hispanic concentrated areas, right? But we look at that as directional, and we say, okay, if it's moving the needle in these highly Hispanic concentrated areas, and it's over-indexed to the general sales and to the non-Hispanic, then we're moving the needle. And goes back to the standards. And as long as our client agrees and is aligned with that analysis, we actually we determine our media investment on that, and we do it by campaign. So it could be that we have a portfolio of products, and it could be that this product is under indexed and this product is over indexed, meaning that the non-Hispanic sales are a lot higher, and that would be under-indexed. And we take it away from there and put it on a product that is over-indexed. So it does take alignment and buy-in by your client, and also a lot of data sharing. But it's the case that we move the needle on some products and not on others at retail. And when we can show it, we optimize that way, just like we would on the media side.
And do you think Walmart and Target are projectable? Because those are the two of the biggest brick and mortars.
Again, it requires your client to be aligned with that. In our case, we have a client that has 3 different, I would say, legacy brands, and within those brands, they have different products. And it turns out that one of the brands is very, they have about like 40% on Walmart, and the other brands is like 20. So in the brands that is like 40% on Walmart, we really look at that very, very closely.
And do those analytics include the online buying at those retailers, or just the brick and mortar?
So then we do the online, we do the brick and mortar, and then on the online side, we haven't gotten like this kind of technical, which is great. But we do some rule-based, where you could do one of your media systems, like Core has it, MMS has it too, where you just do a rule with simple rule-based, any activity within a few minutes, 10, 12, 15 minutes of the airing gets attributed to the media. And if you're running several airings at the same time, you just weight it by rate. But in order to do that, you need to know English. So you would need to, because it's not just the Spanish that's running, right? So it's, if they don't want to provide English media spend, then it's all just very directional, but it's still information. So.
No, I raised the question because we presume that Amazon gets the lion's share of the
Oh, then Amazon.
Right?
Yeah. That's a whole different.
But Walmart and Target, I mean, they do a lot of e-commerce. I mean, nowhere near the level of Amazon, but I wonder how much of the Spanish
as well. And
is
we
going
do
to those
not
brands.
we do not include the e-commerce for Walmart.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
And can I add a small part? If you have enough historical data, there's additional approaches called marketing mix modeling approach that is able to measure the impact on brick and mortar. But for that, you need a lot of historical data. Long story short, is a lot coming up to data. Right?
Yeah, and even the historical, when you have a major world event like a pandemic, that may not even apply.
Yes, you need to flag for that and clean for that. That's for sure. Yes.
Now, one of the other things that we found with this study that we haven't shown it is that the model helps in another way, which is in figuring out creative fatigue. So this particular client, every time we meet, literally every time we meet, one of the first questions out of their mouth is, how do you know when to switch creative? When should we produce another spot? And the answer to that is to try to measure creative fatigue. And this model does that. So question for Shira is the one that's here is how do we use this kind of model to determine for how long we should run a given creative on a given channel?
Great. So one of the strengths of an attribution that's based on machine learning is that you can leverage the data. And I'm sorry, I'm using my hands because I don't have a plan. But assuming you start to spend on a specific creative, you start to see visits coming right to the website. But this is, as of now, what's happening. The big question was, what is Mars just asked, is when that specific creative will stop react. We have come up with a way to forecast creative fatigue, really to find the most probable path that will happen for that creative, that scenario, in fact. So we're testing thousands of scenarios, and we show the scenario that's most probably going to happen. So, for example, let's say one creative is now at a spend of $50,000 and the saturation level is 20%. We can say, for example, that if you add an additional $50,000, you're going to get to a saturation point. Why it's important? Because if you know this ahead of time, you can reinvest the money that you wanted to invest more in that specific creative and never lose, in fact, your budget. So it's very important to track ad fatigue to be the most optimized as possible with your campaigns.
So we've only been together for 3 months. We don't have that model proven yet, but stay tuned, because in 3 or 4 months, we're going to see on some specific channels where she predicted when the creative fatigue would start to show its ugly head. We'll be able to say, okay, she was within some margin of error correct. But the preliminary data that we've seen makes a lot of sense, and the channel and the way we're buying certain channels, it makes a lot of sense. The patterns that are beginning to evolve.
I mean, in the good old days, right? Mm-hmm. Even we would have a direct relation, whatever phone activity and sales, and CPC, right? That we see in the CPC, mm-hmm. And the fact that you have that much going over to the English side. I mean, you really have to be in sync. Talk about monetizing and leaving money on the table. It could look like it's fatiguing, and it could be that it's just consumer behavior changing. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to find a good working creative to begin with, right? So those types of data analysis is going to be key, I think, even more and more moving forward. So
the $1 million question is, if we know that there's this potential traffic going to English, that we see fatiguing in Spanish, how do we determine the lift? How can we measure the lift coming from the English? I don't know if you've had any experience with the clients that give you the data, but how can we measure that lift so that we in fact don't say this commercial is fatiguing just based on the Spanish?
Yeah, no, it's hard. The other thing is, I think it's important to talk to the client, or if you were a marketer, to understand the relation between English and Spanish. A lot of times we see activity going down maybe on the web, but then we find out, oh, that's happening too on the English, but we made up for it on Amazon. Mm-hmm. Or that's happening as well on English, but we're seeing retail numbers go up. So that constant conversation is really, really important, especially what I found even more so. You had mentioned the pandemic and how things have changed and accelerated during the pandemic. I think it was going in that direction anyway. The pandemic is accelerating everybody's behavior to go online, for sure. And I think that if you don't have those conversations, if you're not constantly understanding the data and forcing conversations and sharing amongst the agencies, the change is happening so rapidly that you're going to miss some things. And I think the traffic to e-commerce is one of them. And maybe not just Amazon, like you just said, it's the brick and mortar e-commerce too. Mm-hmm. Where's that? And so somebody at the client side is looking at it. It's about bringing it all together. So,
you work with a few other DRTV shops. How is the use of QR codes making a difference in what they're doing and in driving traffic?
So I know that one of the media buying agencies that we work with, they use QR code, and I'm sorry, I hope there's nobody that's vendor that you send QR code right here, but they told us that they didn't see a lot of impact. I know that for Coinbase, right, it's the Super Bowl, it drove impact, but it was very short term. The website crashed. So at the end of the day, was it worth it? A lot of people are talking about it right now. If it was worth at the end of the day. But this is my gut feeling, and I might be wrong, that QR code, I think it's good for document, for paper. You go to a restaurant, you're scanning, or if you are giving out some leaflet and you want people to not forget who they talked with, so this is great. But for TV, my gut feeling is that it's now, there's some peak, there's some interest, but I don't think it's going to stay for long, because it's I think it's kind of a gimmick. I'm sorry. I feel it's a gimmick that will pass because creative is about creating advertisement that convince, right? There's a story, there's something that people can relate to. So imagine everybody puts QR code on all the ads. That's it. So what's advertisement is about? It's becoming...
Yeah, I think that Super Bowl ad made it a little sexier than it's been. And yeah, they had a lot of hits. It crashed, but they had a lot of just PR around it. So I think we have to set Coinbase aside.
Yes.
But I personally have not seen any major activity. I know before the pandemic there was almost none whenever we tested it. After the pandemic, I do have one client who says they get about 10% because they do run it on like 3-4 minute integrations. And they do get about 10% of their activity from there, but it's like a 3-4 minute integration. You could always test it, right? You could always put the QR code is easier to measure, but I don't have any case studies that I've been exposed to that said the QR code is do anything more than 10%. I was on I was presenting to the conference board, which is a board with major marketing CMOs and from major big companies, and the QR code came up then as well. And they had asked me if I saw any success. I said the same thing I said now, and everybody laughed because everybody said, "Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. Every time we try it, it hasn't been working." There's slightly better activity since the pandemic. I think behavior has changed because of the menu, yes. But I wouldn't start running to QR codes because of the Coinbase. Yeah. We have to continue. We're continuing to test it, and we will, obviously, because things change fast. But there hasn't been a lot of activity from what I saw.
Yeah, we're about to do our first test. We're doing it for a slightly different reason, which is to drive more traffic directly to the Spanish lander. Mm-hmm. Right? So if people see a vanity, compra, whatever, they may be going to the general market site because of that. They just do an organic search. But the QR code will send them directly to the Spanish site. So we're doing it to see if that proportion changes a little bit. Because in the Spanish site, then we have the ability to be able to optimize more, to optimize the landers, to optimize the conversion, because we control that environment. But it's our first test, so who knows?
And I think that we were looking at using QR codes for actually sending a text or providing a phone number instead of the website.
Yeah, for remarketing.
Yeah, for remarketing. So I think that there's a lot to do there, as long as the audience is using it. I think the behavior is not quite there yet, but who wants to leave 10% on the table, right? Nobody. Yeah. So I think we have to continue to test it and refine it, how we use it.
And also I think that if you are deciding to use a QR code, the advertisement needs to be of a certain length. It cannot be 15 seconds, right. 30 seconds.
Even
because
60 seconds.
By the time you take your phone, that's it, the ads ended.
It may turn out to be more of a long-form,
yes.
mid-form, long-form thing.
Yes.
Well, that's why I think the 3-4 minute TV integration, if you're on a program and they're talking about it, gives you time to hear the message, get sold on it, and then say, okay, I want to look at it. But to do it within 60 seconds, that's a lot to ask, I think. Yeah. It's a big ask.
Are we in time? We're good?
Take some questions.
So, yeah, any questions?
Following up on the QR code issue, how I think size matters in this case, size and time. In Denira, in your case, when you're running tests, do you have the QR code in 1/3 of the screen, or in the lower third, or the side third, or is it a smaller QR code?
So I'm going to talk about the most recent example of this client, and it was on the side of the lower bar. So we even had the phone number and the QR code, and it was probably about on the side of the bar, about double the bar size, square. And they want to continue running it. They don't want to leave that 10% on the table. They are seeing 10%. So, and I do believe, behaviors may start changing, but So size does matter, and also the timing. I just can't see it on the 60-second. I can't. But just me personally, as a viewer, you know. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question for Shira. How exactly are you measuring Amazon attribution post-TV airing? Like, how are you separating out all of the noise? Because it's not exactly before you were running TV media versus after TV media. There's so many other promotional channels happening on Amazon. How are you clearing the noise so that you can really attribute that you saw this Amazon lift, this increase in Amazon sales ring because you ran television?
Thank you for your question. So it's all about the data. Can we get access to the data, the quality of it? If we can, we have a way to do a baselining. So for example, you want to measure, there's different kind of statistical approach, right? There is one I mentioned earlier, it's called marketing mix modeling. So it's really taking the spend of all your channels and find the contribution of that specific channel. And you do that with the simplest way I can explain it is like a regression analysis, right? We don't do regression, but I don't know if you remember for your statistics years, and I'm sorry to talk about statistics, but it's an approach that's really looking at cleaning the baseline and finding the impact of each channel when everything is taken into account together. We use a more sophisticated way than regression, and this is one way to do it. But definitely, it's depend of the data that's there.
What we do know is that it moves the needle, right? We do know when we're spending Hispanic media, it is moving on Amazon. What the hard part is to do it at the airing level. We know, in conversations with our clients that it's, when they spend a certain amount of media, holistically, Amazon's moving like crazy. The real issue is getting it down to airings and amount of spend and what portion is Hispanic to a very detailed level, and that's where Shira's work comes
correct
in.
me if I'm wrong, but what intrigued me about this model is that if we look at channels. Now, obviously, channels are comprised of a bunch of airings, a bunch of data points. But she's looking more at the currents of each channel and the impact of that channel on the whole.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So it's kind of averaging things out a little bit to sort of suss out the noise. Because we don't know. I might run a spot on Univision, and there's one running within 30 seconds on Fox in English. It's hard to tell what's what. Or I might be running a spot on Univision, a spot on Telemundo that run in the same 5-minute time period. How do we separate that?
I can explain that. So the way we do it is we look for patterns, right? When a specific spot airs on itself, or there's no other sport, there is a specific patterns that are happening in the data. We kind of record that pattern, and then when there is an additional spot with happening at the same time, we know what happened when that spot was alone, and we are able to dissect based on that. So it's all about patterns.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because when you're just specifically only rule-based within the certain amount of minutes, you're not paying attention to the historical patterns. Yeah. And so when there is noise, it's almost impossible to make the attribution if you're just looking at that one time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you just said, because another problem with rule-based approach is saying, let's look at the first few minutes of impact after a spot is aired. But you cannot say that, because sometimes there's 3 minutes impact, sometimes there's 1 minute impact. You need to let the data, I know I'm saying data speak, and it's like a sentence from 10 years ago, but it's always true. You need to let the data speak. If the impact diminish after 5 minutes, this is where you need to stop to attribute. But if it ends after 1 minute for another spot, this is where you should. So it's depend of the strategy, but a rule-based approach will take away from all these additional insights.
Question on the insights part with regards to the typical general linear TV compared to connected TV. What are you guys seeing on that end?
So
It's a good question.
I can I give Hulu as an example? We did a case study about Hulu, and again, I hope nobody from Hulu is here. We were approached by a media buying agency after the end of their campaign, and they want to know how did they do. So they gave us access to all their past data. One of the channels was Hulu, and we found out that they didn't track creative fatigue, and we found out that they continue to spend after they reached saturation point an additional $800,000, and they lost it. They lost so much money because they didn't track creative fatigue. So as of now, for those campaigns that we analyze, right, I'm sure there's campaigns that they were very successful, but those on the one that we analyzed, we saw less impact than linear TV.
Any other questions?
The connected TV, I think there's I just want to add a little bit to that. I think there's a misconception that you can, because it's connected, because it's like digital TV, that there's somehow a way to get that attribution, like they could click through. Most times you can't click through to an ad. And then there's a misconception also that I think that Hulu provides all that data back to the marketer or the agency or anything. That's not done. I think there has to be a lot of background pixels put in the back and extra costs and fees involved with it. Yeah. So I don't think, in many cases, in the way we measure it the same way than we do linear TV. And I think if you want to invest in all, and Hulu would need to have an arrangement with the station that's running it, and there needs to be all connected, and it's not as clean as you think to attribute connected TV. It's very much almost the same challenges as linear TV, in my experience.
Yeah, and we haven't had, from a pure DR perspective, we haven't had tremendous success with connected TV. But one of the reasons we're bullish on testing QR codes, not necessarily that it's going to work, but we're bullish just on testing it, is because it makes the large screen clickable and sourceable. Obviously on mobile and desktop, that wouldn't be the case. But to the extent that we can make the large screen clickable, it may have some impact. And in fact, we have another lead gen client in the fintech space who bought programmatic that included a lot of CTV. They ended up canceling desktop and mobile and kept the large screen with QR creative. We don't have data, but like specific data and results, but they did measure enough traffic from that to say it's worth keeping. So CTV in the Hispanic space is still
that's true.
Still an issue.
Yeah. Well, it's
the CPMs just aren't.
The case studies aren't strong enough just yet.
Yeah.
We have sporadic success on some campaigns on some stations, but it's not anything to hang our hat on just yet.
Yeah.
Just got to watch it. So.
Anyone else? Oh.
Sorry, it's me again. So just going back to your other point that you see a lift to the English sites after watching the Spanish creative, how do you recommend to your clients to adjust their digital media buys on paid search? Do you see that, we should, if the vanity URL is compra PDMI, are they going to buy PDMI instead? And should that be your first English paid search listing rather than a Spanish?
It's a good question.
Yeah, we have when we're buying digital campaigns, particularly anything that's keyword related, it's a challenge because we can't use, in the general market, a client might have 1,000 keywords, and many of them include the brand, and we can't use the brand. So we can't, we're sort of at a disadvantage to begin with. So we have to get creative with more vanity level uses of any kind of search terms. I mean, I don't know how you've handled it, but the percentage of what goes to what really depends on how. There's no non-aggressive way of putting this. How much of the truth does the general market client really want? How much do they want to admit that there's Spanish language and how much Spanish language traffic is going to be able to make those optimization decisions? Because if you're not willing to ask that question, then there's nothing that we can do to optimize because there's no goal. They look at it as a zero sum. There's no way of making that decision of how much am I going to spend. As opposed to like on TV, DRTV in Spanish is really not a zero-sum game. We can spend incrementally. We generate lift. We generate Spanish calls that English is not. So that question of how much you're spending is not an issue. But if you're looking at a digital ecosystem in any given client, it does become a zero-sum game unless they're willing to ask that tough question.
Yeah, it goes back to you're saying the standards. You have to start with an assumption that you are going to allocate a portion, especially those search terms. Now I'm talking about brand search. So yeah, one is compra PDMI, but somehow you could see a Spanish ad on PDMI, for example, and just put in PDMI. And so we have clients that just have a very unique Spanish brand name, and we know that all that search, it's hard to argue that brand search is from the online ad world. It isn't, because, I mean, you're not going to see an ad on the digital side. You'll click through it. When you see it offline, though, you come in and you put your brand name. So there's not a lot of pushback on assigning search to TV, but the pushback is what portion of that search is on the Hispanic side, especially not something as easy as compra, but when it's just a pure brand search. We do provide also, whenever we start campaigns, any number of Spanish keywords that should be included in their search. And we do make sure that the client knows. A lot of clients think that if the Google search is put on Spanish preference, they'll give us all of that and that takes care of it. But most Hispanics in the United States, the vast majority, do not go into Google and change their settings to Spanish. They won't do that. So you have to have that conversation up front that says this is the behavior of the Hispanic population in the United States. They search online in English. They're going to use your brand names, and we have to have a portion associated to the Hispanic campaign. So it's really an educational session. And it's up to the client whether they want to allocate it. They usually do if they're bought into the Hispanic strategy.
I can also answer to that. We had one of the media buying agencies that work with us. In fact, they asked exactly what you asked. They wanted to understand the immediate impact of TV on other digital channels, such as search. And we looked at what's happening just after a TV ad is heard on search, on social, different kinds. And we found, for example, that on Google search, paid and organic, it went up by 7% versus when there's not a TV ad. So there's a way to do it, which it's really measure it exactly what happened after the TV is aired.
I mean, a brand search name is you're going to put when you put it in there. It's coming from your offline world for the brand. Right.
Yeah, any direct or organic search. And there is another workaround, which is in the social world. We do a lot in social, and it's more mid-funnel, right? So, and the reason why it works is because you can measure the engagement, and you can actually have conversations. We do a lot in Messenger, for example. So we're actually having conversations, driving them to the lower funnel. But that mid-funnel is something that's not happening in the general market to the Spanish language consumer, because we are conversing with them in Spanish, even if it's on an English language browser. So that's one way of not necessarily saying what percentage should I give to Spanish versus English, but what else can I do in Spanish that I'm not doing in English at all that might have a lift?
That's interesting.
Anyone else? Oh, how about a round of applause for our great group here? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcelino. Thank you, Denira. Thank you, Shira. Wonderful work. Please join us at noon Our Brand Response Council, who are the creators of our popular Take 20 webinar series, will be here talking about reducing frictions and solving problems in the post-COVID era for your business. So thank you.